April 28, 1941. Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, Virginia. The first steel plates of USS Essex were laid down on what would become the keel of the most devastating class of aircraft carriers in naval history. Welding torches sparked across massive hull sections as workers assembled the first of 24 Essex-class carriers that would transform the Pacific War. Hull number CV-9. Length 872 feet. Displacement 27,100 tons standard. Flight deck capable of launching 90 to 100 aircraft. What none of them knew was that this single ship design would trigger the most devastating carrier production campaign in naval history. The Pacific War had taught American planners that aircraft carriers were not just weapons of war. They were the decisive instruments of naval power. Cut those supply lines of enemy air power and entire enemy fleets would become vulnerable. The Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet had established 6 fleet carriers as their primary striking force: Akagi, Karga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku. These carriers had executed the Pearl Harbor attack and projected Japanese power across the Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's carrier doctrine positioned naval aviation as the decisive factor in modern warfare. The Americans would soon prove him right, though not in the way he intended. USS Essex cut through Atlantic swells during her shakedown cruise at 32.7 knots, her Westinghouse-geared turbines generating 150,000 shaft horsepower. Captain Donald Duncan stood on the bridge studying the flight operations. His ship carried 36 F-6F Hellcat fighters, 36 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 18 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. The Essex-class ships were given priority at all yards because President Roosevelt and the U.S. Navy recognized that aircraft carriers would make all the difference during World War II. The Essex represented American industrial engineering at its most efficient. Unlike Japanese carriers that required individual design modifications, the Essex-class achieved mass production through standardization. Each ship displaced 27,100 tons standard, 36,380 tons fully loaded. The production figures were overwhelming. Traditional carrier construction in Japan achieved completion times of 4 to 5 years per vessel. The Essex-class averaged 20 months from keel laying to commissioning. Commander David McCampbell had studied carrier aviation tactics until they were burned into his memory. Princeton educated with a mind for aerial combat and logistics, McCampbell understood that carrier warfare was ultimately about sortie rates and pilot survival. Aircraft launched per hour multiplied by carrier numbers. Pilot replacement rates exceeding combat losses. The difference between victory and defeat often came down to industrial capacity and training programs. Aboard the Japanese carrier Shokaku, Captain Hiroshi Matsubara reviewed his air group strength. 72 operational aircraft. 9 previous war patrols had taught him that American industrial capacity was accelerating at rates Japanese shipyards could not match. The Imperial Navy had attempted to build carriers of the Unryu class, based on the older Hiryu design to reduce construction time and cost, but most would never be completed or lack trained aircrews. Shokaku displaced 25,675 tons standard, powered by steam turbines generating 160,000 shaft horsepower. Her crew of 1,660 men had survived attacks from American carriers, submarines, and land-based aircraft. But the carrier's greatest vulnerability remained the same weakness that plagued all Japanese naval aviation: the inability to replace losses in trained pilots and aircraft at rates matching American production. The American shipyards formed an unprecedented production line. Newport News Shipbuilding was assigned 7 carriers. Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard received 4 initial contracts. The Philadelphia Navy Yard, Norfolk Navy Yard, and New York Navy Yard joined the program. Each shipyard specialized in specific construction phases while maintaining standardized specifications. USS Yorktown CV-10 launched December 21, 1942, just 371 days after Pearl Harbor. USS Intrepid CV-11 launched April 26, 1943. USS Hornet CV-12 launched August 30, 1943. USS Franklin CV-13 launched October 14, 1943. The launches continued with mechanical precision as American shipyards demonstrated industrial capacity unprecedented in naval history. Radar operator First Class James Patterson worked in 4-hour shifts monitoring the SK air search radar aboard USS Bunker Hill. His equipment could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles under optimal conditions. The Japanese carriers operated with inferior radar systems that provided minimal early warning. At 14:35 on June 19, 1944, Patterson's scope illuminated with the unmistakable signature of incoming aircraft. Range 150 miles, bearing 260 degrees relative. Multiple contacts, estimated 69 aircraft in the first wave. He pressed the alarm button and reached for the sound-powered telephone. Combat Information Center, radar, large raid bearing 260, range 150 miles, angels unknown, closing. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had committed his entire carrier force to Operation Ago. Admiral Soamu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, had ordered Ozawa to implement the operation and accomplish what Japan had failed to do 2 years earlier at Midway. 9 carriers including Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Junyo, Hyo, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. 440 carrier aircraft represented Japan's lost concentrated naval aviation strength. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the 5th Fleet, oversaw the defensive preparations from his flagship USS Indianapolis. Enemy aircraft approaching at 300 knots. Time to intercept 30 minutes. F-6F. Hellcats already airborne on combat air patrol vectored to intercept coordinates. The geometry of aerial combat reduced to vectors, speeds, and altitudes. While Ozawa mustered 440 aircraft in 9 flattops, Spruance commanded 905 fighters, torpedo and dive bombers from 15 carriers, including 6 of the new Essex-class. Task Force 58's first fighter interception came at 1500 hours. Hellcats dove through the Japanese formation with devastating effectiveness. 6-gun armament, 2,000 rounds per minute, armor-piercing and incendiary ammunition. The Japanese Zeros, once masters of the Pacific skies, were now outclassed in speed, armor, and firepower. Lieutenant Alexander Vratsu shot down 6 Japanese aircraft in 8 minutes. His Hellcat's superior altitude performance and diving speed made engagement geometry simple. Climb above the enemy formation. Dive through with guns blazing. Use superior speeds to escape and climb for another attack run. The Japanese pilots, many with less than 100 hours flight time, could not match veteran American aviators with 500 to 1,000 combat hours. The second Japanese attack wave arrived at 15:30. 128 aircraft met a wall of American fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Naval aviation and anti-aircraft fire shot down nearly 480 Japanese aircraft, 346 of those carrier aircraft on 19 June alone. The slaughter was so one-sided that American pilots dubbed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By sunset on June 19th, Ozawa had lost 346 carrier aircraft and 50 land-based planes. American losses totaled 30 aircraft. The equation was inexorable. Japanese pilot training programs required 18 months to produce a marginally qualified carrier aviator. American programs were graduating fully qualified pilots every 6 months, in numbers exceeding Japanese total production by factors of 10 to 1. But the Essex-class carrier's demonstration of overwhelming superiority had just begun. On June 20th, Admiral Mark Mitchell ordered a maximum range strike against the retreating Japanese fleet. 216 American aircraft launched in the late afternoon, pushing to the extreme limits of their fuel range. The strike sank carrier Hio, damaged Zuikaku and Chiyoda, and destroyed another 65 Japanese aircraft. The returning American strike faced darkness and fuel exhaustion. Mitscher made the decision that would become legendary. Turn on the lights. Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminated, providing beacons for returning aircraft despite submarine threats. The recovery demonstrated American confidence in their superiority. 80 aircraft were lost to fuel exhaustion, but most pilots were rescued. Japan lost 2 more carriers and virtually all remaining trained aviators. The Battle of the Philippine Sea represented more than tactical victory. It demonstrated the impossibility of Japanese victory against American industrial might. At the heart of the Japanese Navy's hopes for victory was the idea of the decisive battle, in which the American fleet would be lured close to Japanese bases and destroyed. Instead, American carrier production had created an insurmountable advantage. By July 1944, 14 Essex-class carriers were operational in the Pacific. USS Essex, Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, Franklin, Ticonderoga, Randolph, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hancock, Bennington, Boxer, and Bonhomme Richard. Each carrier operated 90 to 100 aircraft, though by 1945, some air groups exceeded this with additional night fighters. The combined air strength exceeded 1,400 first-line aircraft, with trained replacement pilots for every cockpit. Japanese carrier production had managed to complete 1 new fleet carrier since Pearl Harbor. Taiho, commissioned March 7, 1944, survived only 3 months before being sunk by submarine USS Albacore. The carrier Shinano, converted from a Yamato-class battleship hull, was commissioned November 19, 1944. She was sunk en route, 10 days after commissioning, on 29 November 1944, by 4 torpedoes from the U.S. Navy submarine Archerfish. She remains the largest ship ever sunk by a submarine. The disparity in carrier production revealed the futility of Japanese resistance. American shipyards were completing 1 Essex-class carrier every 2 months. Japanese yards required 4 years to build a single fleet carrier. By October 1944, when the Imperial Navy committed its remaining carriers as decoys at Leyte Gulf, the outcome was predetermined by industrial capacity. The Battle of Leyte Gulf demonstrated the Essex carrier's complete dominance. On October 24, 1944, 17 American carriers launched continuous strikes against the Japanese fleet. Admiral Kurita's center force, including the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, faced relentless air attacks. Musashi alone absorbed 19 torpedo and 17 bomb hits before sinking, demonstrating the concentrated firepower Essex air groups could deliver. Meanwhile, Admiral Ozawa's Northern Force, the carrier decoy force, consisted of Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, with only 116 aircraft total among all 4 carriers. Many of these aircraft were piloted by trainees with fewer than 50 flight hours. The American carriers launched 527 sorties against Ozawa's force on October 25, sinking all 4 Japanese carriers. The last fleet carrier of the Pearl Harbor attack force, Zuikaku, went down with most of her crew. Admiral William Horsley's Third Fleet now contained 17 fast carriers built around the Essex-class core. Task Force 38 could maintain continuous flight operations, launching strikes every 90 minutes for days without exhaustion. Japanese naval aviation had been reduced to untrained pilots flying one-way kamikaze missions. USS Franklin demonstrated the Essex-class design's survivability on March 19, 1945. 2 armor-piercing bombs detonated in her hangar deck, triggering massive explosions and fires. The ship suffered 724 killed and 265 wounded, the highest casualty toll survived by any U.S. carrier. Yet Franklin remained afloat, returned to the United States under her own power, and could have returned to service if the war had continued. The contrast with Japanese carrier survivability was stark. Japanese carriers Akagi, Karga, Soryu, and Hiryu at Midway were destroyed by damage that Essex-class carriers repeatedly survived. American damage control training, equipment, and ship design philosophy prioritized survivability. Japanese carriers emphasized offensive capability over defensive resilience. Commander John Thatch, developer of the Thatch-Weave defensive tactic, analyzed the impact of American carrier superiority. His assessment emphasized that each Essex-class carrier multiplied combat power through more aircraft, better radar, superior anti-aircraft defenses, and damage control capabilities that kept ships fighting after absorbing punishment that would sink any other Navy's carriers. The production statistics told the complete story. During World War II, the U.S. Navy ordered 32 aircraft carriers of the Essex class, of which 26 were laid down and 24 actually commissioned. Japan had commissioned fewer than a dozen true fleet carriers across 2 decades, including Hosho, Akagi, Kaga, Ryujo, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Taiho, and the incomplete Unryu class. The United States produced more fleet carriers in 1943 alone than Japan commissioned in 20 years. Newport News Shipbuilding completed 7 Essex-class carriers: USS Essex, Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, Franklin, Ticonderoga, and Randolph. Each ship from keel laying to commissioning in under 20 months. The yard's workforce, including thousands of women workers, maintained 3 carriers under simultaneous construction throughout 1943 and 1944. Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard completed 6 carriers: USS Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hancock, Shangri-La, and Lake Champlain. The production rate accelerated with each hull as workers perfected assembly techniques. Lake Champlain achieved commissioning just 14 months after keel laying, a record for fleet carrier construction. The Philadelphia Navy Yard demonstrated the advantages of modular construction. Entire ship sections were prefabricated while the keel was being laid. USS Antietam and USS Boxer were completed in 15 and 16 months respectively. The techniques developed for Essex-class construction would influence shipbuilding for decades. Individual Essex carriers achieved remarkable combat records that demonstrated their superiority. USS Lexington, known as the Blue Ghost because Tokyo Rose repeatedly reported her sunk, participated in every major Pacific campaign from Tarawa to Japan. She destroyed over 300 enemy aircraft and remained operational despite multiple kamikaze hits. USS Enterprise's Air Group, though operating from a Yorktown-class carrier, worked seamlessly with Essex-class carriers, demonstrating the standardization of American naval aviation. The ability to cross-deck aircraft and pilots between carriers multiplied operational flexibility. Japanese carriers, each with unique characteristics, lacked this interoperability. The Japanese response revealed desperate recognition of American production superiority. The Shinano conversion attempted to create a carrier from existing battleship construction. The third member of the Yamato super battleships, Shinano had been under construction since May 1940, when the decision was made after Midway to convert her into an aircraft carrier. The result was a compromised design that lasted 10 days before submarine torpedoes sent her to the bottom. Japan's Onryu-class program attempted mass production using simplified designs. Most carriers were still under construction or cancelled by the end of the war, while the few completed ships never embarked air groups due to severe shortages of carrier-qualified aircrew. Only 3 were completed before war's end. None ever operated with a full air group due to pilot shortages. The program's failure demonstrated that ship construction without trained aircrew was meaningless. By January 1945, American carrier task forces operated with impunity in Japanese home waters. Task Force 58 under Admiral Mark Mitchell could launch 1,000 aircraft strikes against Tokyo itself. The Japanese had no operational carriers and fewer than 100 qualified carrier pilots. The certainty of American victory was absolute. The human cost differential was equally revealing. For the loss of 123 aircraft and 109 dead during the Philippine Sea Battle, the U.S. destroyed nearly 600 enemy aircraft, sank 2 enemy fleet carriers, a light carrier, and 2 oilers, killing nearly 3,000 of the IJN's pilots and sailors. Each Essex-class carrier required approximately 3,000 crew members. American training programs were producing 5,000 qualified carrier personnel monthly. Japanese training programs had effectively ceased by late 1944. The technological gap was equally decisive. American carriers operated with SK and SK-2 radar systems providing fighter direction at ranges exceeding 150 miles. The Identification Friend or Foe (IFF) system prevented friendly fire incidents during massive air battles. Japanese carriers relied on visual observers and primitive radar sets with effective ranges under 50 miles. Flight deck operations demonstrated American systematic superiority. Essex-class carriers could launch a full strike of 80 aircraft in under 45 minutes. Recovery operations using LSO landing signal officer guidance and improved arresting gear allowed rapid landing cycles. Japanese carriers required nearly 2 hours for equivalent operations with higher accident rates. The Combat Information Center, CIC, aboard each Essex-class carrier represented a revolution in naval warfare. Real-time plotting of hundreds of aircraft, surface contacts, and submarine threats. Radio communications with every American aircraft. Coordination between multiple carrier task groups. Japanese carriers operated with voice tubes and manual plotting boards. Aviation fuel system design revealed philosophical differences. American carriers used sealed systems with CO2 purging to prevent vapor explosions. Fuel tanks were surrounded by void spaces and water-filled compartments. Japanese carriers, including the new Taiho, suffered catastrophic losses from single torpedo hits when aviation fuel vapors exploded. The kamikaze campaign that began in October 1944 represented Japanese recognition of conventional defeat. One-way suicide attacks were the only means of reaching American carriers through the wall of fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Yet even these desperate measures achieved limited success against Essex-class carriers' armored flight decks and improved damage control. USS Intrepid survived 5 kamikaze hits and returned to service each time. USS Ticonderoga took 2 kamikaze strikes that killed 144 men, but remained operational. USS Essex herself survived a kamikaze strike on November 25, 1944, but killed 15 men, but inflicted minimal structural damage. The carrier's resilience frustrated Japanese planners who expected single hits to achieve carrier kills. USS Bunker Hill provided another testament to Essex-class survivability. On May 11, 1945, 2 kamikazes struck within 30 seconds, causing massive fires and killing 389 men. Despite damage that would have sunk any Japanese carrier, Bunker Hill sailed to Bremerton under her own power for repairs. The ship's survival demonstrated superior damage control training and equipment. By March 1945, with Bonhomme Richard commissioned as the 14th Essex-class carrier to sea combat, American carrier strength in the Pacific exceeded 100 flight decks, including light carriers and escort carriers. The Japanese had no operational carriers and fewer than 5,000 aircraft of all types in the home islands. The mismatch was absolute. Admiral Chester Nimitz analyzed the strategic implications in his report to Admiral Ernest King. The Essex-class carrier program has provided us with not just ships, but a systematic superiority that the enemy cannot match. Each carrier represents American industrial might, training excellence, and technological advancement that exceeds Japanese capabilities by orders of magnitude. The production tempo never slowed despite victory being assured. USS Shangri-La commissioned September 15, 1944. USS Lake Champlain commissioned June 3, 1945. USS Tarawa commissioned December 8, 1945. The program's momentum continued because American planners were already looking beyond World War II to potential future conflicts. Essex-class ships played a central role in the Pacific theater of World War II from 1943 through the end of the war, beginning with raids in the Central Pacific and the invasion of Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands. Every major amphibious operation from Tarawa to Okinawa depended on Essex-class carriers for air support. The Marianas invasion demonstrated carrier operational tempo. 15 carriers launched 470 fighter sweeps, 220 bombing strikes, and maintained continuous combat air patrol for 19 consecutive days. Aircraft availability rates exceeded 80% despite combat losses and mechanical attrition. Japanese land-based aviation was eliminated as an effective force. Philippines operations in October 1944 saw 17 fast carriers operating in 4 task groups. American carriers launched over 1,400 sorties on October 24 alone during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The next day, carrier aircraft sank the super battleship Musashi with overwhelming air attacks that no ship could survive. Commander David McCampbell's achievements with Air Group 15 aboard USS Essex exemplified American superiority. On June 19, 1944, during the Marianas Turkey Shoot, McCampbell shot down 5 Japanese dive bombers to become an ace in a day. Later that afternoon, during a second sortie, he downed 2 more Zeros over Guam. On October 24, 1944, in the initial phase of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, he became the only American airman to achieve ace-in-a-day status twice, shooting down 9 enemy planes in a single mission. McCampbell's Air Group 15 became known as the Fabled 15. During 6 months of combat operations, they destroyed more enemy planes, 315 airborne and 348 on the ground, and sank more enemy shipping than any other air group in the Pacific War. The entire air group was credited with sinking 296,500 tons of enemy shipping, including 1 battleship, 3 aircraft carriers, 9 cruisers, and 19 destroyers. The pilot training differential revealed another dimension of American superiority. Each Essex-class carrier's air group required approximately 350 pilots and aircrew. American training programs were producing 2,000 qualified naval aviators monthly by 1944. Japanese training programs had collapsed to producing fewer than 100 partially trained pilots monthly. Operational losses told the story of experience differentials. American carrier air groups averaged 2% operational loss rates per month from accidents. Japanese units with inexperienced pilots suffered 10% monthly operational attrition. Combat loss ratios by 1945 exceeded 10-to-1 in American favor. The Turkey Shoot was not an anomaly, but the norm. Aircraft production statistics reinforced carrier superiority. Grumman delivered 12,275 F-6F Hellcats between 1943 and 1945. Curtiss-Wright produced 7,140 SB-2C Helldivers. General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division manufactured 9,839 TBM Avengers. Monthly production exceeded Japanese annual production by 1944. The logistics network supporting Essex-class operations was equally impressive. Fleet oilers, ammunition ships, and supply vessels maintained the carriers at sea for months. Underway replenishment techniques perfected during the war allowed continuous operations. Japanese carriers required port visits for basic supplies, limiting operational flexibility. The Iwo Jima campaign in February 1945 showcased Essex-class endurance. Carriers launched strikes for 72 consecutive hours before the invasion, then provided continuous close air support for 36 days. Aircraft from USS Essex alone flew 1,418 combat sorties, dropping 156 tons of bombs and firing 1,041 rockets. No Japanese carrier force could have sustained such operational tempo. By April 1945, as operations commenced against Okinawa, the disparity had become overwhelming. Task Force 58 operated 18 fast carriers, including 14 Essex-class ships. This included both Essex-class fleet carriers and Independence-class light carriers, with air groups totaling over 1,400 aircraft, with complete replacement aircraft and pilots available. The Japanese scraped together 1,900 aircraft of all types for kamikaze attacks, most piloted by students with under 30 hours flight time. The Okinawa campaign lasted 82 days, during which Essex-class carriers maintained continuous operations despite 1,900 kamikaze sorties. USS Bunker Hill, USS Enterprise, and USS Randolph all survived kamikaze hits and continued operations. The Japanese expended their entire remaining air strength, achieving minimal strategic impact against the armored American carriers. The final carrier raids against Japan in July and August 1945 demonstrated total supremacy. Carriers launched strikes against airfields, rail yards, and harbors with minimal opposition. On July 10, 1945, Task Force 38 launched 1,022 sorties against Tokyo, more aircraft than Japan possessed in the entire home islands. Japanese anti-aircraft defenses were ineffective against high-performance American aircraft. The atomic bombs ended the war before Operation Olympic. The invasion of Japan could demonstrate even greater carrier concentration. The British Pacific Fleet's experience operating alongside Essex-class carriers revealed American superiority even among allies. British carriers with armored flight decks but smaller air groups struggled to match American operational tempo. HMS Formidable operated 36 aircraft compared to an Essex's 100. The British openly admired American damage control techniques and adopted many for their post-war carriers. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of Essex-class dominance. None were lost to enemy action, although several sustained crippling damage due to aerial attacks. Despite kamikaze attacks, conventional bombing, and torpedo attacks, not a single Essex-class carrier was lost to enemy action. Japanese carriers suffered nearly 100% loss rates. The survivability differential was not luck, but design philosophy and damage control excellence. Admiral Raymond Spruance's assessment captured the achievement. The Essex-class carrier program provided the United States Navy with the decisive weapon system of the Pacific War. Not through individual superiority alone, though that existed, but through systematic production that overwhelmed Japanese capabilities. We built more carriers in 1943 than Japan commissioned in 20 years. That reality determined the war's outcome. The legacy extended beyond World War II. Essex-class carriers would serve through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 1990s as training carriers. USS Lexington, the last operational Essex-class carrier, was not decommissioned until 1991, serving 48 years. Their design influenced every subsequent American carrier. The production techniques developed for their construction revolutionized shipbuilding globally. The final accounting was stark. 24 Essex-class carriers commissioned. 14 saw combat in World War II. Air groups from these carriers destroyed over 5,000 Japanese aircraft and sank 200,000 tons of warships. Japanese carrier aviation, which began the war with devastating success at Pearl Harbor, was eliminated through American industrial superiority. Captain R. Lee Burke, who would later become Chief of Naval Operations, observed the Essex-class carriers operating with Task Force 58. His assessment was characteristically direct. The Japanese started this war with the best carrier pilots in the world. We ended it with the only carrier pilots in the world. The Essex-class made that possible through sheer numbers and superior design. We didn't just defeat them, we overwhelmed them. Industrial mobilization statistics revealed the true scope of American achievement. Newport News Shipbuilding increased workforce from 11,000 to 31,000 workers between 1941 and 1943. 3 shifts maintained round-the-clock construction. Women comprised 20% of the workforce by 1944. Each Essex-class carrier required 55,000 tons of steel, 1,000 miles of electrical cable, and 250,000 man-hours of labor. The Japanese struggled to complete single carriers, while American yards maintained multiple hulls in simultaneous construction. Between 1932 and 1941, the Japanese Diet had passed 4 commercial shipbuilding bills to provide special subsidies to companies that ordered vessels with military characteristics. But military conversion of merchant vessels could not match purpose-built carrier production. The technological revolution embedded in Essex-class construction went beyond mere numbers. Welding replaced riveting, reducing construction time by 30%. Modular assembly allowed parallel construction of major sections. Improved ventilation systems prevented aviation fuel vapor accumulation. Armored flight decks resisted bomb penetration. Deck edge elevators maintained flight operations during aircraft movement. Radar-directed fighter control transformed carrier defense. The teamwork of fighter directors aboard the carriers and pilots in the air provided the advantages which spelled disaster for the attackers. A single Essex-class carrier's CIC could coordinate defense for an entire task group. Japanese carriers never developed equivalent capabilities, relying on individual pilot initiative rather than systematic control. The human factor multiplied American advantages. Damage control training was mandatory for every crew member. Firefighting schools taught techniques that saved multiple carriers from loss. Medical facilities aboard each carrier included operating theaters and 60-bed sick bays. Japanese carriers had minimal medical facilities and limited damage control training. The economic impact of the Essex program extended throughout American society. Shipyard workers earned unprecedented wages that fueled consumer spending. Small businesses in shipyard towns thrived. The program demonstrated that democratic mobilization could achieve production rates exceeding totalitarian command economies. By August 1945, with Japan's surrender, the Essex-class had achieved something unprecedented in naval history. A single ship class had determined the outcome of the largest naval war ever fought. Not through individual excellence alone, but through systematic superiority in production, training, and operation that no opponent could match. Vice Admiral John McCain, commanding Task Force 38 at war's end, provided the final assessment. The Essex-class carrier was not just a ship. It was a weapons system that included the vessel, the air group, the supply chain, the training establishment, and the industrial base that produced them faster than the enemy could sink them. That's not fighting fair. That's fighting to win. The numbers told the complete story. From April 1941, when Essex was laid down, to August 1945, when Japan surrendered, American shipyards had created the most powerful naval aviation force in history. 24 carriers of a single design, over 2,000 aircraft operational at any time, 30,000 trained carrier personnel, victory through overwhelming industrial superiority. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the wreckage of Japanese carriers rested on the ocean floor. Akagi, Karga, Soryu, Hiryu at Midway, Shoho in the Coral Sea, Shokarku and Taiho in the Philippine Sea, Zuikarku, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho at Leyte Gulf. Their crews honored by both sides for courage against impossible odds. But their sacrifice marked the end of an era when individual skill and experience could overcome industrial disadvantage. Admiral Chester Nimitz's final report to the Secretary of the Navy concluded, "The Essex-class carrier program represents the greatest concentration of naval air power ever achieved. These ships and their crews have demonstrated that American industrial might, combined with superior training and technology, creates a combat capability that no enemy can match." The Essex-class didn't just win the Pacific War. they made it impossible for Japan to win. The revolution in naval warfare was complete. Battleships, which had dominated naval thinking for centuries, were relegated to shore bombardment and anti-aircraft defense. The aircraft carrier, perfected in the Essex-class design, became the capital ship of modern navies. The Essex-class carriers had proven that in modern warfare, production capacity multiplied by technological advancement equals victory. They had demonstrated that democratic nations, when fully mobilized, could harness industrial power that authoritarian regimes could not match. In the vast Pacific Ocean, where distances were measured in thousands of miles and battles determined by aircraft operating from mobile bases, the Essex-class had proven that quantity produced with quality equals absolute victory.